Dan Friedman at Mother Jones wrote an article that was supposed to be about something else entirely. The story he had set out to write was about Eric Garrison, a senior Pentagon advisor to our Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth. Instead, the story became one about journalistic intimidation attempts that came straight from our own government. And this probably isn't surprising. In October, the Pentagon made it very clear how they felt about journalists. New journalistic rules were imposed by Hegseth, who himself is best known for working at a cable news channel rather than for his military career.
Down goes Hegseth! Down goes Hegseth! Duncan down!
The rules prohibited journalists from reporting on information that was not first approved by Hegseth. In other words, anything contradicting a narrative that the Trump government was trying to push would not be allowed out of the Pentagon. And that meant that journalists would be unable to do their job at all. No investigative reporting, no working with inside sources, no speculation as to what things could mean in a greater context. The result was that the majority of the journalists working within the Pentagon were expelled, leaving behind just a few so-called journalists who were little more than Trump influencers. But Dan Friedman isn't a reporter within the Pentagon. He's just a reporter with Mother Jones, who was doing his due diligence, inquiring about someone that he was trying to write a story on. He followed journalistic protocol, giving a deadline for response to his inquiry. Instead, he received threats to himself and to his family from none other than Jack Posobiec. And if you'll recall, Jack Posobiec rose to MAGA/Trump world fame for boosting the Pizzagate conspiracy theory, heavily promoted at the time by QAnon. Now, Posobiec is asking journalist Dan Friedman about whether or not he has a, quote, creepy fetish for Asian women. So how did this all start? Here's what Friedman wrote. I had discovered that Garrison's email address was linked to a public Goodreads page with a currently reading list that included various books featuring stories about Asian wife sharing. These pornographic works with titles such as Asian Wife Went with Her Dad's Friend, a Cuckold Story, appeared on the list alongside 2 books by Hegseth and a handful of military histories. They contain detailed descriptions of cuckolding, group sex, and scenes involving ladyboys, a term used to refer to Thai transgender women. The page, active since 2021, was taken down the day after I contacted the Pentagon and Garrison about it. I also asked about a 1997 domestic violence allegation against Garrison, about his dating habits and past relationships with foreign women. I inquired if the Pentagon had assessed those relationships as part of Garrison's security clearance process, and more broadly, if his personal life might create concerns about his susceptibility to foreign influence operations. So then he detailed the response that he received. Posobiec's email arrived the day after my initial inquiries. The false claims he asked about, particularly the Asian fetish thing, seemed to mirror my questions. Posobiec, who in 2016 promoted the bogus Pizzagate conspiracy theory, gave me a deadline, 5 p.m. on October 29th, that was the same as the one I had given the Pentagon press office. A Pentagon spokesperson and Posobiec both denied coordination. Garrison declined to comment, but considering the questions, timing, and Posobiec's link to Defense Department officials, the situation seemed clear. This was either an incredible coincidence or a deliberate message: publish your article and get smeared. Posobiec's email claimed I have a history of objectifying women and that I had engaged in some kind of misconduct. The email also included questions about my marriage. So he was asking about something that he later admits in the article he wasn't even sure would end up being a story that gets published by Mother Jones. And that's how these things go sometimes. What gets published and what doesn't is an editorial decision. The people involved, the journalists, the editors, the SEO team, etc., decide whether or not a story is compelling and relevant enough to their audience that they're publishing to. They consider how well the article is likely to perform, but also how well the story fits into the brand's voice and the brand's beat. That's just how these things work. But now that Friedman had received a strange response from Jack Posobiec, that decision was almost made for them. If they chose not to publish of their own volition, it would appear that they had been bullied into killing the story. However, now that they felt obligated to publish anyway, the story had become so much more than it was originally. And the original story itself was nothing to balk at. It wasn't just about whether or not Garrison had some questionable sexual preferences. It was about security concerns. For one thing, former national security officials told us that for Pentagon personnel in particular, relationships with foreign partners are a major concern. Garrison lived in 2016 with a woman who evidence suggests may be a Chinese national. That woman started a limited liability company during that time with a name that references Chinese investment. It was registered at Garrison's home address, then dissolved a few months later. Garrison has had what appears to be a stormy personal life that has included 3 marriages. In 1997, a jury acquitted him of a domestic violence charge after an accusation by his then-wife, according to court records. Additionally, email addresses linked to Garrison turned up in 3 separate data breaches, including the infamous Ashley Madison leak. But as John Cipher, a former senior CIA officer, told Mother Jones, in normal circumstances, a government official who might be involved with such websites and who had romantic relationships with foreigners would draw scrutiny. It's all about whether you are susceptible to a foreign service getting any leverage against you, Cipher said. It may not be disqualifying, but it should be looked at. So the salacious bit of the story isn't what Garrison, a high-ranking and influential member of our Defense Department, gets up to in his free time. It's one about the potential liability that his online activity and sexual preferences create for our military security. But then 2, it's about the Defense Department's attempts to silence the story before it even became a story, a perfect demonstration of the Streisand effect in action. The Pentagon has received so much bad press since Hegseth and Trump took over that it's hard to keep track of. One can only imagine that damaging stories have only slowed down, even though they haven't really completely stopped, from what would have come out because in a move that doesn't make anyone look guilty at all, Hegseth kicked out all of the credible press and forbid them from reporting anything that was outside of what's essentially government propaganda. He said he wanted to verify what was being reported before it was being reported, but that is not how freedom of the press works. The press, and I know it's hard to believe in today's particular media ecosystem, but journalists, real journalists, not influencers, understand how important fact-checking is. Their own reputations are often on the line, as well as the reputations of the publications they work for. There is far more incentive within legitimate media outlets to fact-check their pieces than there is not. And in the case of Friedman, it became his journalistic responsibility to report on the story as it presented itself to him, even if that was different from the story he originally was trying to publish. And we need this kind of diligence and fortitude going forward, especially from seasoned members of our media. All right, that's it for me. If you got anything out of this, please like the video and subscribe to the channel for more. Thanks.